In this video, you're going to learn 5 reasons why your church isn't engaging in worship and what you can do to help them engage. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com. This is the place where we talk about how to lead yourself well, lead your church well, and lead worship well. So if you're interested in that, make sure you click subscribe down below. But let's get into it today, because today we're talking about engagement in worship. How do you get your church to engage? That's all we want as worship leaders, right? We want our church to participate in worship. I don't know why I'm being so violent, but we want our church to engage in worship. And that's kind of how we measure our success as worship leaders, right? We look at the people that we're leading and we think, were they participatory today? Did they do what I want them to do? Did they engage in worship? And first of all, I don't think that that's necessarily our win or lose criteria. I think that what our job actually is as a worship leader is to simply provide people with the opportunity to respond, and then they take it or they don't take it. But we can't force people to engage in worship. But that being said, there are a few barriers that we put up in our worship leading that might keep somebody from engaging in worship. So while we can't 100% guarantee that everybody in the room is going to engage in worship, because it depends on where they're at and if they are choosing to participate, we can focus on a few things that will allow them to more easily engage in worship, and we can remove as many stumbling blocks for them as possible from keeping them from fully engaging in worship. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the small stumbling blocks that we create that might keep somebody from engaging in worship. And that's what our job is. We take away all of those barriers, as many as we possibly can, and then we provide the opportunity to respond to the goodness of God. So before we get into that, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from on a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate your church's engagement in worship? Like, what are they doing on a normal Sunday? From a 1 to 10, 1 being like they're standing there with their phones out, not really paying attention, and a 10 being like they're all in. They're all about what is happening during your time of worship. So let me know down below, 1 to 10, how would you rate your church's engagement in worship? And I'll talk to you in a second. Thanks so much for leaving your answer down below. Let's get into 5 reasons your church doesn't engage and ultimately how you can fix it. The first reason you might feel like your church isn't engaging in worship might not be anything wrong with them. It might not even be what they're doing. It might be that your understanding of what engagement in worship looks like is flawed. Maybe you have this particular idea of what you want your church to look like whenever you take your eyes off your music stand, which you shouldn't be using anyways. Oh, that's a different video. Whenever you open your eyes and you see the people in front of you on a Sunday morning, maybe you have this perfect idea of what you think you should see. Maybe you think you should see their hands raised. They're just yelling out all of the words to the song. They're falling on their knees. And you think if they aren't doing these things, then they aren't engaged in worship. But here's the thing. Worship looks different for different people. And I know that you already know that, but we need to be reminded of that again and again. As worship leaders, we get caught up in this. I don't want to say caught up because it's not a bad thing, but we get focused on this worship culture of like all of the things that we've seen in YouTube videos that we watch. We've watched all the live recordings of songs of Maverick City Music and Bethel, and it just seems like people are so into worship, and they are, and that's an awesome thing. And we can aim for that in our church. But just because the people in your church don't respond in worship that way right now doesn't mean that they aren't engaging. Somebody standing there with their eyes closed like this, you might think that they've fallen asleep. They could just be listening to the lyrics. Maybe they aren't even moving their mouth. They aren't even singing any words. They could just be taking the words in, and maybe they've had a really tough week and they're like, they don't feel like singing right now. And obviously we can lead them to that point, because part of worship can be singing through the trials that we face. But at the same time, maybe that's how they need to engage in worship in that moment. So don't discount that just because they don't have their hands raised or because they aren't on their knees or whatever it is. Allow people to worship the way that they need to worship. And then at the same time, as we know that there are biblical mandates of worship and how we can worship, we can teach our church that and help them grow in those forms of worship, raising your hands and all of that sort of stuff that we think that we need to see for people to engage in worship. We can teach our church that, but also understand if your church doesn't regularly engage in worship in that way, then they aren't just going to magically do it someday. And it's actually up to you as the leader to teach them. So if you have this idea of what worship should look like or can look like, and you really want that in your church, then it's up to you as the leader to teach your church that those are appropriate forms of worship. Encourage them to raise their hands. Encourage them to get on their knees in prayer while you're singing. Whatever you want worship to look like in your church, whatever your view of worship is, teach your church that. And then don't expect them to do it right away, but teach it over and over again. Maybe if your church isn't engaging in worship, it's because your understanding of engagement is flawed and they really are engaging in worship. The second reason people might not be engaging in worship is because you're trying to sing them into worship instead of leading them into worship. Don't try to sing people into worship. I see this all the time. We think that if we just close our eyes a little bit harder, sing a little bit better, a little more passionately, then maybe people will just follow along, right? Because this is like our musical time of worship. So I just need to play my song really well, maybe have some cool musical dynamics that I've incorporated into the arrangement, and then people will engage in worship. But here's the thing, our job as worship leaders is not to lead songs, it's to lead people. So don't put the musical side of things above the relational people side of things. Don't just lead songs, lead people. And whenever it comes to that, don't just think that if you sing harder or look more passionate on stage, or even if you authentically are more passionate whenever you're up in front of people, that doesn't mean that people are just going to see that and engage. Yes, we want to model worship, but we also have to lead our church. So lead your church into worship. And what do I say whenever I mean that? Well, I'm talking about speaking transitions, essentially, right? Like that's the part that whenever we're first starting out, at least, or maybe you still feel this way, we wish that we just didn't have to do. Like, I am a musician in the church. I can get up there and I can play a guitar and I can sing a song, but don't ask me to speak in front of people, right? No, if we are worship leaders, we need to get over that. We need to grow in that. If you want to grow in that, I did a whole series on that, which I'll link in the description below, called What to Say While Leading Worship, the ultimate guide. I walk you through every step of the way. So check that out. It's like 2.5 hours. You can probably just get away with watching the first video, and that'll help you tremendously to speak with confidence in your worship leading. So I'll link that playlist down below. But don't just think that you're up there to sing songs. You are up there to lead people. So if people aren't engaging in worship, take stock of that. Think, okay, have I just got up in front of people on a Sunday morning recently and sung songs? Or have I actually tried to lead them? Have I created meaningful moments for them to engage with, where I point them to the goodness of God and then lead them in having the opportunity to respond to that goodness? Number 3, time to get super practical. It's just song keys. What key are you putting your songs in? And I think some people think that this is just like a cop-out. It's like, well, if people really wanted to engage in worship, then they would just engage in worship. And yeah, I kind of agree with that. I don't think that song keys are as important as I've probably made them sound in the past, or as some people think that they are, but I do think that they're really important. And so, how do you pick a song key? Well, I'll link once again a video down below, or right here, I think, to a video about how to put your songs in a singable key for your congregation. But essentially, you want to keep the melody of the song between a low B flat, which, if you're a guitarist, that's the first fret on the A string, or a high E flat, which is the 8th fret on the G string. Go watch this video right here about how to put your song in singable keys, your worship songs in a singable key for your congregation, and just try that method out and see, like, maybe people haven't been quote unquote engaging. And for that, in this context, it just means singing along. Maybe they haven't been singing along because they can't, because the song is way too high and your church meets at 8 in the morning and people don't want to like scream at the top of their lungs at 8 in the morning. So try bringing this. Usually it's the fact that the song keys are too high. So if you find consistently that your church isn't singing, this is like a quick, easy thing that you can try, is to just knock your song key down like just a whole step. You know, if you're doing it in the key of A, try it in the key of G and just see how that works. So at the end of the day, maybe you sound amazing in the key of A, but if your church can't sing along in the key of A, then it's not about us sounding amazing as worship leaders. It's about allowing the opportunity for the people of our church to respond to the goodness of God. The fourth reason people might not be engaging in your worship gatherings is because you might be picking songs that you want to sing and not songs that they need to sing. I know we're guilty of this as worship leaders, and we pick these songs that we love, right? And it's okay to pick songs that you love to lead and you think are great songs. We should be doing that, but not at the expense of foregoing songs that people need to sing. So what do I mean by that? Well, think about the things that are going on in the lives of the people of your church and think, okay, what is the song that I have planned for Sunday? What is it communicating? What truth about God? What encouragement is it providing? What is the song about, and how does it relate to what is going on in the lives of the people in my church? And you can think about specific people. You know, this is why improving your relationships with the people in your church is the best way to actually improve your worship leading, is because whenever you know people more, you're able to lead them better. So use that to your advantage. Think about, okay, this person has this thing going on in their life right now. You know, maybe it's something like they have a health issue, or they're having trouble with their marriage, or whatever, and think about those people specifically and then use that to form how you plan your service. Or maybe they've got something amazing going on in their lives and they need songs that help them celebrate, but you personally, maybe you aren't in that same place as like the rest of your churches. Well, I think that we need to sacrifice whatever our needs are in our time of corporate worship, and we need to elevate the needs of others, because that's what it means to be a leader. So always seek to serve the people of your church, and that's speaking thematically, but let's also talk about just like song choice. Let's be honest, we say it all the time in our heads, but worship songs are not exactly the most musically exciting to play all the time. Although I think newer worship songs are starting to push that barrier a little bit more. So I'm happy to see that. But generally speaking, you know, you get that old cliche, worship songs are just 4 chords over and over again, and that's not really wrong most of the time. And as worship, or as musicians in the church, we probably would prefer to play a more musically interesting song. But that's going to make it really hard for your church to sing along with, because they aren't musicians. I've talked about this a lot before on the channel, but essentially you're a musician, so you think about these things all the time. You're able to handle musical elements of songs in a way that the average churchgoer probably can't, because they just aren't a musician. And so we need to once again sacrifice those musical desires that we have in order for our church to fully engage. So have you just been choosing songs for yourself? You're like, this is going on in my life right now, and so I really want to sing about this, or I really like this song. It's got a cool melody. It's got some really cool words. It's got a cool guitar part that I like to play, and so I'm going to pick that. Don't just pick songs that you want to sing. Pick songs that your church needs to sing. The fifth reason why people might not be engaging in worship in your church might be because they don't know that they're supposed to. Maybe nobody ever told them. I think we just assume as worship leaders that people know that they're supposed to sing along because we think about that every single week, right? Every time we lead worship, we're like, were the people singing along today? Were the people not singing along today? Why aren't they singing along? What do I need to do so that they sing along? And we overthink this and we forget this simple step of just inviting people to sing along. It can be as simple as, would you sing this with me? I think, even though we know that this isn't the case, probably the assumption for a lot of churchgoers is that this person's up on stage and they're singing a song right now, so I'm going to enjoy it, right? Or I'm going to sit back and receive it, or whatever it is. And if they've never been taught about corporate worship, worshiping together as a church, then they probably don't know that they're supposed to sing along. So that's why you can't sing people into worship without saying anything. So use your speaking transitions to teach people that they can sing along, that they're invited to sing along. It can be as simple as saying, sing this with me, or teaching them a little bit more about why we sing together as we worship, to encourage one another, to reinforce our theology, all of these sorts of things. You can slip those into your speaking transitions, which, once again, if you need help with, I'll link a playlist down in the description below to help you with that. But don't just ignore the simple fact that people might not know that they're supposed to sing along in worship. So if you want people to engage, and for you that means singing along with the songs, which I think is what a lot of us want, make sure you remind people to sing along. Don't just assume that they know that. Hey, if you want to improve your worship leading and be able to better provide the opportunity for people to respond in worship, then I've got something free for you. There's a link down in the description below, right at the top of the description, to a free audio training that I put together called 5 Tips to Instantly Improve Your Worship Leading. These are 5 simple things. You just have to know and make the effort to do them, and you will improve in your worship leading and be able to lead your church better and actually understand what it means to lead your church better, not just to play songs better, but to actually be a worship leader and not just a song leader. So check that out in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me today. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.